Hey everybody, it's Angel from Halo Inspirations. We give you inspirations to help you spread beauty and joy through your quilting journey. Happy hump day. Whoop whoop. Yes, I have some allergies, so I sound a little weird. Bear with me. Happy hump day. Happy Wednesday to you. What are we doing today? Today is another back to the basics. And this time, this month, I've separated the videos to help make this a little bit more enjoyable. Maybe you just need a refresher on part of it. We will get back to the topper after this week, which is so important. We're going to talk about the 1/4 inch seam and sewing straight and a little bit of pressing, okay? So the 1/4 inch seam, it is something I'm so very passionate about. I did a lot of research when I was just on YouTube, and I would hear a lot, my blocks aren't coming out to the right size. I don't understand a 1/4 inch. I don't understand a scant. Why do we use a scant? What is a scant? Why don't we use a 1/4? What do we use a 1/4 for? How do the feet work? I mean, there's so many questions I heard. And now that I'm actually teaching in person, it's very apparent to me that it's important that we do talk about the 1/4 inch seam. I have so many questions that pop up with it and how to make that adjustment to what your fabric is telling you to make the adjustment with. Okay, so one of the reasons we do use a 1/4 inch, I want to let y'all know, a lot of times, from my understanding in sewing garments, they use either a 3/8 or a 5/8 seam. Well, I got to be real with you. If we were trying to come up with a 9.5 inch block, I don't know about you, but the math would drive me crazy. We can work in quarters and halves very easily, right? 2 quarters equal half. That way you're finishing at 9 instead of, your unfinished is 9.5. It'll finish at 9. The math is really, really easy. The other reason is it actually takes away some of that extra bulk, because having 3 to 5/8 of an inch in your seam, that's a lot of fabric compared to the 1/4. Okay, so there are the reasons that we focus so heavily on the 1/4 inch. Math is easy, less bulk. Love it. Okay, so going into the feet then, saying with a, sewing garments with a 3/8, my sewing machine, the one I use in the videos currently, is the Singer Quantum 9960. And it comes with this general pressing foot. And I'm going to pull you in under a camera so you can see these better. But this actually is a 3/8 foot. I didn't know nothing about nothing when I was sewing. I didn't know what a 1/4 inch seam was. I didn't know how to get a 1/4 inch. I did a lot of trial and error. I did a lot of forcing. Okay, not a pretty thing. Okay, so this is the general pressing foot. It does have a little black ball. I don't know if I put the video out what that little black knob is. If I haven't, I know I've done it in Creative Kingdom. If I haven't, I'll make sure to do one soon. But it is just a 3/8 foot. So if I were just to sew with this foot, lining up the fabric along the edge, I wouldn't have a 1/4 inch. I'd have more than a 1/4 inch. 3/8 is bigger. 2/8 is a 1/4. 3 is more than 2. So this is bigger than a 1/4 inch, okay, by an 1/8. All right. Then a lot of machines, and mine included, comes with either it's called a 1/4 inch foot, a patchwork foot, a quilters with edge foot. There's so many terms, but it's supposed to be a 1/4 inch. Now, I will warn you, not every 1/4 inch foot is equal. They're not all an exact 1/4 inch. And the method that I use allows for you to make that adjustment, okay? If in fact you figure out that your foot is not a 1/4 inch. But you could have a 1/4 inch foot, which would sew right on a 1/4 inch. And I will tell you, my new machine, I do have the Rebel in-house here in the quilt shop, made by the Little Rebel. Whoop, whoop. Here in the quilt shop for sale, we are going to be selling the Little Rebels. And it does come with a 1/4 inch with an edge, okay? So I'm going to show these here in just a second. I'm going to show you what I mean when they're stitching, where they're stitching, okay? And I will take pictures. There'll be lots of pictures in this video. because I want you to be able to see. So let me switch cameras here. All right, I'm going to slide on over so I can see. All right, so this is my patchwork foot. This is my 1/4 inch foot. And if I lay it down on my ruler, this dotted line that you see is a 1/4 inch, okay? And if I lay it down so that it was pretending to be on fabric, and I lined up the fabric along the edge, and again, I'll take pictures. If you look to see where the needle would hit, it's actually on the 1/4 inch line, okay? So that, it is technically a 1/4 inch foot. If we looked at my general pressing foot, and we lined it up, okay, there's a little tiny, let me grab this. There is a little tiny notch right here. That tells me where my needle's going to hit. And if we look at this, it will definitely be 1/8 bigger than my 1/4 inch. It is not going to fall along this 1/4 inch seam, or on the 1/4 inch line, okay? It is bigger, so that's a 3/8. So that's too big. You can use it, you just have to make adjustments. The little Rebel does come with one of these feet, so you might see that you have a 1/4 inch foot that has a guide, and the idea is that it helps guide your fabric to keep it straight once it goes into the foot. Now, I haven't used this yet, and I don't know much about it, but when I lay it down on the 1/4 inch line, I don't know if you can see, but there is a tiny, whoops, let me get my hand out of there. There's a tiny gap between my ruler, and I think you can see that, but again, I'll take pictures, between what would be the fabric, which is the end of my ruler, and the guide. So if I actually put it on there, it's not going to be right on the 1/4 inch. So I haven't used it yet, and I wouldn't know how to make the adjustment with the guide on there. Now, if you had a machine that you can move the needle like a millimeter or so, you can make the adjustment with a guide on your foot very, very easily, okay? But I will definitely get back to you on my foot with the little Rebel, and we'll talk more about it in the future. But I wanted to show this to you because it's really interesting, because the actual foot, if I line the foot up even, it doesn't hit it's less than 1/4, so maybe that's a scant. I don't know. I'm still working this out, and if you have one of these feet, I'd love to hear how you make adjustments for your 1/4 inch if you need to. So that's the 1/4 inch foot with a guide, okay? So you're going to see me using this one, my patchwork foot, but you'll see how that works. But know that the method that I use, you don't need to go out and buy extra feet, guys. If this is what you got, you can use it. And we're going to use other things to figure out exactly where we need to be on our 1/4 inch, okay? So those are your feet. Yes, I had to wear glasses. I can't see. And those are the different types of feet that you might see within your stuff, right? We all have stuff. And it's important to understand them. And you know, if you do have a patchwork foot, lay it down on that ruler and see how it's working for you. And really get to know the feet that you have. But again, you don't have to go out and buy one, okay? So I do want to talk a little bit about what affects the 1/4 inch seam. You can, different thicknesses of fabric. If you are pressing a seam and you have a thicker fabric, it's going to take up more room in your seam, which then would make your sub blocks a little short, okay? And same reversed. If you have a thinner fabric, it'll take up less room in the seam, so your blocks may come out a little longer than what you want, okay? Another thing that affects your seam is thread. So I use a 50 weight very, very religiously for piecing. Love, and for quilting for that matter. But for piecing is what we're focusing on with the 1/4 inch. So I use 50 weight religiously from Aurifil. And if you go to a thicker thread, some people like to stitch with a 40 weight 40 is actually thicker than a 50. So it may take up more room in your seam, which then would make your subblocks just slightly smaller, okay? If you stitched with an 80 weight, for instance, that's a really thin thread. So it's going to take up a less room. So then you're going to have longer blocks because it's taking up less room. So it's really important to understand that your fabrics and your threads can affect your 1/4 inch seam. And I will encourage you, whatever you're using when you start, don't change. So if you use a 50 weight at the beginning of your project, please use your 50 weight through the entire project. If you have to change, you need to go and measure that 1/4 inch again, just to make sure that things are still in line with where you want them to be, okay? Make any adjustments that you may need to do. So I always encourage, just stick with the same. Don't change. All right, for this particular experiment, I'm going to be using, remember last month I talked about cutting fabric, so that's important. These are 2.5 inch squares that I'm using, and I'm going to put them together very simply using right sides together, and we're going to measure our 1/4 inch seams together. Okay, so I am using 2.5 inch squares. Now, one of the things that I said in the video I did years ago, I think it was 4 or 5 years ago, I said to not use the fabric that you're using in your project. I watched the video. I was appalled. And I'll tell you why. I know this is the fabric I'm using in the project that we're doing together with the sewing machine mat. This is the fabric I'm using. So it's important to know that I'm going to use it to test my 1/4 inch seam because I know that this is consistent in the entire project. If I were to use a different fabric completely, it might be a little thicker or thinner and affect my 1/4 inch seam. So anytime I start a project, I pull the fabric that I'm using for my project and I use it to get my 1/4 inch seam on board, ready to go before I actually start sewing my project. So you're seeing these fabrics today because this is what I'm making our sewing machine mat with, okay? So I thought that was interesting. I saw that and I went, what? Yeah, use the same fabric, guys. Okay. If you have to rip, you have to rip. Sometimes we have extra fabric. That's always a good thing because you're still using the same fabric. But if I have just enough, I will rip until, you know, I might rip one. I don't want to rip a whole bunch. So then I'll take some more and I'll just try to figure out that 1/4 inch seam, making sure I'm good to go. So using the same fabric that is in your project is awesome. Okay, so we talked about the feet. We talked about what affects the 1/4 inch seam, and we talked about using the same fabrics. I'm going to show you 3 different methods that you can use very simply to get an understanding of what's happening with your 1/4 inch seam. The first method is I'm just going to sew, and goodness help me, with my patchwork foot, okay? This is a 1/4 inch, so I'm going to use it without anything else to see how well this works with the fabric and the thread that I'm using in the blocks that I want to get, okay? So just the patchwork foot is the first method. The second method, and I don't have it sitting here right with me, I'm going to use a 6.5 inch ruler, not a 12.5, and I'm going to use the 1/4 inch line along with some painter's tape. And I do talk about Bonnie Hunter, love us some Bonnie Hunter. I talk about the method she uses, which is actually, she uses an old credit card or hotel card and instead of the painter's tape. Either one's a good method. That makes it easy to find stuff in your own home. You don't have to go out and buy a bunch of stuff, guys. That is one of the key things. Try to be resourceful. We are so resourceful of quilters, of what you already have, okay? And the last thing that I'm going to show is using the Ideal seam gauge. So this happens to be my absolute favorite. I've gone through a lot of seam gauges, and I don't know why. I don't know why there's a difference, but there is. And this has become my absolute favorite. This is a brand new one, and you'll see this again. This is mine. You can see the difference. I have had this for years, okay? And with this, I actually use guidelines for quilting. I actually use their seam guide. So you'll see that up close and personal. And we'll get started on finding this 1/4 inch seam. Now I will tell you, with painter's tape and with the credit card and with the seam guides, what it does is allows you to sew a straight line. Sewing straight is, it can mess up your 1/4 inch, right? If you ain't straight, it's all over the place, right? If you're good at sewing straight, you may only need a patchwork foot, okay? I still need something to help me sew straight. So sewing straight, these two methods will help you do that. The painter's tape, the credit card, and the seam guides. They'll help you get that achieved, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and get started with the first method and the second. They're all in the same clip. And so we'll go straight to the sewing machine, and I will see you guys in just a sec. Okay, the very first method that I'm going to show you is with my own 1/4 inch foot, which is a patchwork foot, like I said earlier. Now, I'm not the greatest at sewing straight without a guide, but this is a method if you so choose. So I'm just going to lay down my presser foot so that the fabric goes along the edge, okay? And we will lower the needle. And yes, I'm going slow because I am not the straightest sewist. And come to the end and cut threads. Okay, let's see. Here we go. And it is got a nice pretty stitch here. So lovely. At a quote-unquote 1/4 inch, because this is a 1/4 inch foot. So we're going to mark this as A, okay? The second method is I'm going to take a ruler. So let's say you don't have a 1/4 inch foot and you can't do any measurements off of that. If you'll notice on my ruler here, I've got a dotted line, okay? This is the 1/4 inch foot. So I'm going to simply lower this, or put it underneath, and I'm going to set down the needle right on top of one of those dotted lines. And you're going to be very careful because you don't want to hurt the needle. And I'm going to want to try and keep the ruler straight. And you could do one of two things. You could either use an old hotel key. This is a Bonnie Hunter method, okay? She does use an old hotel key or an old credit card because it has a nice lip to it, okay? So it can help guide your fabric. And she uses a Scotch tape, double-sided, I want to say it's poster board, but don't quote me on that. But it's got no residual on the wall or on your sewing machine, because that's what we're all about here. But I'm not going to use that today, but I just wanted to give that to you as an option. What I did is take good old-fashioned blues painter tape, and I actually layered 3 on top of each other. Now when you put this down, you want to make sure that you're nice and flush. Oh, might help if I lowered the presser foot to hold the ruler in place. And I cut 3 layers, and you want to make sure that you do not cover your feed dogs when you do this. And you just want to lay it nice and straight, okay, next to the ruler. Lift your needle a little bit, pull out your ruler, and this should give you a 1/4 inch. So again, I've got 2 pieces of fabric here, right sides together. I am going to go ahead and lower the presser foot. I'm going to hang on to that thread for a second, and now notice that I have the fabric laying next to the painter's tape. This painter tape begins becomes our guide. Okay, so it's very, very important. I'm going to go ahead and lower the needle, and I'm going to simply, using the tape as my guide, send it through at 1/4 inch. Now the really cool thing about using this method is that you don't need a 1/4 inch foot. You can use any foot because you used the tape as a guide that is measured from 1/4 inch on your ruler. Now what becomes, I'll have to show you here in a minute, if this is not coming out to the appropriate side, then we will have to go ahead and make adjustments. So this is the second method, works very well for a lot of people. And I'm going to set up my machine a little bit. I'm also going to mark this one right here, as sample B. Okay, sample B was with any foot. We used the ruler for 1/4 inch, and we used tape to help guide us. Okay, so that's B, and A was just the 1/4 inch foot, all by its lonesome. So I'll see you guys in just a sec. For this last method, like I just showed you, I'm using my Ideal Seam Gauge. I know I showed you the new one earlier, but I am going to load it on a regular 1/4 inch. Okay, so what you do is you make sure that the numbers are facing away from the sewing machine, that the arrows, I know it's really hard to see, the arrows are facing towards the machine. Okay, and you just simply go to the regular 1/4 inch and you drop the needle down into the hole. Now you don't want to slam it, you don't want to push the needle down button, because sometimes, like I'm having here, it can be a little difficult to find the hole. Maybe glasses at this point would be helpful. There we go. Yep, look how easy that was. Gotta wear your glasses. Okay, so what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to line it up so that it is straight. I kind of look along the edge of my 1/4 inch foot. Now, if you'll notice, I don't know if you can tell, but the purple thing, the Ideal Seam Gauge here, actually sticks out a little bit further away. And that's pretty common. Not every 1/4 foot is the same, just like I said. So we're going to lower it, the presser foot down to lock it. Now, does that mean that it's going to be perfect and it's not going to move? No. Then I take the guidelines for quilting, the seam guide from them, and it has a little sticker on the back. So I'm using a brand new one with you guys. Okay, I'm going to pull that off. And then I'm going to simply, again, don't cover the slit with the feed dogs. You want to keep the feed dogs available so they can do their job. Lay it right down underneath and then simply pull it away, the seam gauge, leaving your seam guide right in place for you. It's got a nice lip again. So I'm going to simply line up, getting it ready to sew. Two pieces of, there we go, two pieces together, right sides together. Instead of dropping my needle, I went ahead and did the hand wheel, and I'm just going to simply start sewing and send it through using this seam guide as my guide. Okay, when I get to the end, I'm going to go ahead and cut threads, and I've got a nice stitch. This is going to be mark C. Okay, so let's check out exactly how well each of these three methods did. I'll see you in just a sec. Okay, so I do have all three of these, and I know they're hard to see. I put the letters in here, so I'm just going to hit it with the iron real quick. Now I talk about pressing being one of the top things. Oh, and it got dark all of a sudden. What? Let me get it a little brighter. There we go. Okay. So this is A, this is B, and this is C. Now, I do talk about pressing as one of the important things to successful quilting, right? Or piecing. So the first thing I like to do is set the seam, which only means that we are putting an iron on it Why do we do that? Why do we do that? I'm sure you've seen a lot of people doing it, but why do we do it? So the reason is thread does have a little bit of moisture in it along with your fabric. So by placing your iron on top of it, what it's doing is it's allowing that thread to sink a little bit more into the fabric. With that moisture, heating it up allows it to just very nicely sit in the fabric, okay? Gets it ready to be manipulated. We're also adding heat to the fabric because we want to take away some of the memory, okay? Fabric has memory and it will go back to where it was. So we want to start to change the memory that it has by adding that heat. All right. And then we're simply, to be real with you, you should do a tiny bit of a finger press. Don't stretch, don't pull, just like piano keys. And then you can simply place the iron right on top and you're going to let it want to sit for a second. Okay. The best thing to do to allow the memory to reorganize in the fabric is to let it sit and cool. Now, I do use a clapper, and you'll see that next week, but I'm just going to let this cool. And I'm going to, so this one, I should have flipped them over. That one was A. This one is B. Set the seam. Now, I won't do the piano keys, but I'm just going to very gently push it on over. And last but not least, we're going to, I got a thread sticking out here. We're going to set this seam and press it nice and gently. You don't want to do this. You don't want to tug. You don't want to pull. You don't want to swirl. In quilting, we press. We don't iron. Just so you know. So I will let this cool for just a second. And while it's doing that, I'm going to go ahead and pull this away so we can measure. Let me switch cameras with it. So you don't have to see the hustle and bustle, but I'm going to let these cool while that's happening, and I'll see you in just a sec. Okay, so I got everything cleared out, and I've just got the blocks down here along with a ruler. We're ready to measure, and I'm going to be really honest with you. I went ahead and took a sneak peek, and they all did what I thought they were going to do. But I'm going to show you, and then we're going to fix one of them. Okay, so we did mess with 2.5 inch squares, so I wanted to go over this with you. So 2.5, that's a 2, plus 2.5 is equal to 5, right? Okay. Well, each one of these, we sewed a 1/4 inch seam. So we're using a 1/2 inch. When you add these together, you get 1/2 inch, should come off of the original. So we're going to take 1/2 inch off, and we're going to end up with 4.5 inches. So when we sewed these two together, okay, it should have come out to 4.5 inches. So when we lay this down, and I'll take pictures and throw them up. When we lay it down, this, as long as we cut correctly, these should measure at 4.5. And if you can see this, if not, I will throw a picture up, but it's not ending at 4.5. Okay. It's ending short of 4.5. Now this is A. A was my 1/4 inch foot. Okay. So, I will also say when you do this, you should have your seam on a 2 1/4. Okay. Because half of it minus the seam, half was 2.5. We took the seam out, so it's 2 1/4. Okay, so it's a little short. So if I didn't check the method and I just kept sewing, I wouldn't have an accurate 1/4 inch according to the fabric and the thread. Okay, so that was just the presser foot. The next one was B, and we used tape with the 1/4 inch line that we lined up. So we're going to lay this down. Okay. And again, I'll throw a picture if you can't see it, but we're just short of 4.5 inches. Okay. You want to make sure that 2 1/4 is good. You want to make sure all of everything else is straight. And I will say we're short of 4.5. All right. Last method, I lined it up with the seam gauge. That's C. Lined it up with the seam gauge, and I put down the seam guide. Now I lined it up not on a scant, but on a regular quarter, and I'll lay this down. And I'm pretty short over here. I think you can see that. That's pretty obvious. Okay. So this is my point to, you really do want to check the 1/4 inch seam and making sure that your blocks are coming out. Not that you're sewing a 1/4 inch, because we sewed a 1/4 inch, but my blocks are not coming out correct. Now, just out of giggles, okay, I'm going to measure my seam. So I'm going to lay down my ruler and I'm going to put it right on the stitch. And I will say we have right on the stitch a perfect 1/4. Okay, so it did sew the 1/4. Let's do it to the other ones. Let's turn this over. It's hard for y'all to see the stitching. There we go. It's hard for me to see the stitching. I'm going to use my glasses here. To be real, nope. I sewed a little crooked on this one, I think, but not bad. But it's right on the stitch line, and I'm a perfect 1/4 inch. Okay, last one. This was my presser foot, which is the one I would expect. I keep looking for the one that you might be able to see the stitching, but the stitching just melts. So we have another perfect 1/4 inch. The stitch line is on the 1/4 inch, and the fabric goes to the end of the ruler. So just because you measure your 1/4 inch on the back doesn't mean that that's going to get you the results that you're looking for. So what do? We were all really short, right? Most of the time we were within a thread. Some of them were a little bigger. So if you're short in length, so you didn't go all the way to 4.5, you're going to want to make that 1/4 inch, the seam, a little smaller than a 1/4 inch. Okay. If you were longer than 4.5, you're going to want to take in more of the seam. You want a larger than a 1/4 inch of what we know to be a 1/4. Okay. So I'm going to explain that, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to line up my sewing machine with my seam gauge, because you know how much you love looking at this thing. Okay, let me just pull this one out. I'll put it down here. Instead of lining it up on the Instead of lining it up on the 1/4 inch this time, I'm going to line it up on a scant. Okay, and I'm going to pay attention and make sure I'm really straight. Now, look at the difference. I have used this sucker for years. Can you see that? This is a brand new one. It still has the tag on it. So we're going to readjust, because remember, I'm short. Now, it'll be really interesting, because I'm going to make sure that I've cut my squares at 2.5. That is important. Because if they're not 2.5, it ain't going to matter. I would have to make more of an adjustment. But I'm going to make sure that these two squares here, I'm going to sew these two together, and I'm going to make sure that they are, in fact, 2.5 inches. Well, I can do one of them right now with you. Now there's one underneath, so let's pull that out. Let's put this back on there. Remember, we want the line of the ruler on the fabric. That is 2.5 inches. Okay, so you want to make sure that you check those blocks first, that you did cut accurate. And we're going to reload and do a scant 1/4 inch, and I will tell you 90%, probably 95% of the time, I'm using a scant, because I guess because I use a thinner thread. I always use a 50 weight, and I use Quilt and Cotton. Different manufacturers they'll feel different. You'll see that it feels different. So something might feel a little thicker or a little thinner. So you always want to test those blocks. So let me go ahead and bring you back to the sewing machine, and this time we're going to do it on a scant. I'll go ahead and press it off camera, and then we'll remeasure together and we'll see what we get. So I'll see you in just a sec. Back at the sewing machine, I went ahead and left this on because I wanted to show you, you can pull it off. There's no residual and we can reuse it. So I'm going to reuse this same one. So first I'm going to load it in the scant 1/4 inch using my glasses this time. There we go. And I will tell you, it's very interesting to me. I know on my foot what it looks like, and I know you probably can't see it, but I can see that it's actually inside the edge, okay? And that's important because when you're learning to sew straight, you want to know where it's positioning itself. I want to make sure I'm straight. As my fabric is going through, just so I can keep it nice and straight. Okay. So I'm going to lift that presser foot up, pull it out. Same method here. Now I've got these 2 fabrics. I'm going to put them right sides together. We're going to set them down. Okay. I'm going to go ahead, I don't know, my thread's down in there. Probably nest on the back. That'll be fun. Nesting may actually cause some little problems with your 1/4 inch if there's too much bulk there, but I just usually pull it out. So I'm just going to go ahead and following my guide. Whoop, I think I'm getting, no, I think this is going to be too big. Well, maybe not. I'm going to go ahead and cut threads. And, oh, that's really skinny. You see how skinny that is? That actually looks like an 8. So I'm going to line this up one more time. Yep, it is a 1/4. I'm going to put it back under just to check. Nope, it says it's a scant. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to measure this and see how we did. See you in just a sec. Trust the process, right? Okay, so I'm going to lay this down. It's nice and pressed. And remember that you want to be sure that your 2 1/4 is lined up. Now I will tell you a little secret. So when you press to one side, okay, this is pressed to one side, right? You get a little mountain here. This fabric of which it's pressed towards is actually higher than the other one. So the 2 1/4 actually lays on the side of the valley side, the lower side, not the mountain side, but the valley side. And then it goes all the way out to the edge here, and I'll take a picture, but it lays really nice right along my 4 1/2. Woohoo! Okay, so does that always work that way? No, it doesn't. I'll be real. Sometimes I keep going back and forth, and sometimes, I know this sounds really crazy, every blue moon I have to find a point where it's right in the middle. But I've gotten so used to it that I pretty much know where it should line up within the foot that I use. But sometimes you're going back and forth, and I will say if you're struggling too much, you need to walk away. Try it another day. Don't frustrate yourself too much, because maybe you're tired. Maybe your eyes are tired. So there's a lot of things that can play if you keep going back and forth between a scant and a 1/4, or scant and a 1/4, trying to figure out where that magic spot is. And every blue moon, it's like, I'm not even kidding you, it's right in the middle. So you just have to keep playing. You just have to keep trying, but understanding what your machine, your fabric, all of your stuff, your thread, how much it's taking up. It's so important to understand. It may not be an exact 1/4 that you need. You just might need a hair of something smaller or a hair of something larger. Okay, so I wanted to come back at you and show you this. We are in a 1/4 inch. We are good to go. So, and I sewed straight. Okay, so when you sew cattywampus, you might be over on the bottom and under on the top of where you need to be because you didn't sew straight. The guides, whether you're using tape, a credit card, or guidelines like I do, they really help keep you sewing straight as long as you keep that fabric flush against the seam guide that you're using, okay? So, at any rate, that's it for now. Let me come back at you. I'll see you in just a sec. So you saw that I use a scant, and I will tell you again, 95% of the time I do. So what is a scant? It's actually a thread or two less than a regular quarter. That thread or two difference can make a change, okay? So that's why it's important to understand both. How is it working when you sew your fabrics together? Is a 1/4 inch good? Or do you need to use a thread or two less and go to the scant? Sometimes you may even have to go further. Sometimes you may have to go just slightly bigger. It's okay. You can always make those adjustments as needed. You can just slide your guide, if you're using a guide, just slightly over a thread or two, left or right, to make sure you're getting that 1/4 inch. But I wanted to explain what that scant was, okay? Not everybody needs a scant, but it's there in case you do, to get those sub blocks or get your blocks to just the right size. The other thing I wanted to talk about is, although I've got my 1/4 inch ready and to go, I will say after probably 4 or 5 things that I sew together, I check to make sure my 1/4 inch is still on board. I usually send about 5 things through. I have the assembly line, right? And you're going to see this next week. So I'll send 5 through, sometimes 10. I'll pull them off, I'll press them, and I check them. And all I'm doing is I'm making sure that shift did not happen and my 1/4 inch guide didn't shift out of the way in one way or the other, and it made it go off. Because there's nothing worse than sewing all of 25 blocks together to find out at the beginning you were really good, but by the end, you weren't really good, right? So I just check periodically. And one of the things I like to do, even when I write patterns, is I tell you what those sub blocks should equal. Because that's another way to make sure that your 1/4 inch is still on board, okay? Just a little FYI, always recheck. Recheck to be sure your shift didn't happen and you're still sewing the 1/4 inch seam. The last thing that I wanted to talk about was those feed dogs. I did tell you, whether you use painter's tape, credit card, or any kind of guide, you don't want to cover the hole where the feed dogs come in. You want to stop before that. And of course, you don't want your foot to lay on top of the guide either, okay? But the reason you don't want to cover those feed dogs, what do those feed dogs do? Those little jiggy jaggy things that you'll see come up and down in your machine. If you're not familiar with what feed dogs do, on the bottom they sit, you put your fabric on top, and it moves through the machine. Those feed dogs are actually grabbing the fabric and they're moving it. They come down, they come back up, they grab the fabric and they move it, and it's a continuous motion. So they're helping your fabric move through the machine. If you cover those holes, there's nothing for them to grab, and your fabric won't move unless you're pushing it. And that's not always going to be accurate. So when you're using a guide, be sure to not cover those feed dogs so they can do their job for you. They can work for you and you work less. Makes a better accurate stitch. Makes them nice and pretty and straight and just the way that you want your piecing to be. Okay, so those are the 3 things that I wanted to cover. I thought of something else, but now it's gone. So I'm going to let you know that I will be here today at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Why? Because we're in Virginia for our live Q&A, live quilting and answers. So we're going to talk about the 1/4 inch seam. You may have questions. You can feel free to drop them down below in the comments. I'll be sure to address them during the live. And if you want to come along, we'd love to have you there. We love it when y'all come. And if you have any questions or comments at that point, we'll definitely chit chat about all of that. I know there's something else I'm going to share with you, so I will be sure to do that on the live. And so 3 p.m. today for your live Q&A. And next week, we are going to piece the top together for a sewing machine mat. And so I'll talk about pinning. I'll talk a little heavier about pressing so that we can get that under control. But yes, this captured the last part of your basics to really get you successful quilting. And next week, when we're actually putting these things together, we'll just tweak on some things to make sure that you have some better tips and tricks and ideas and understanding on how to make more success in your piecing and your quilting journey. Okay, so I'll see you later today, 3 p.m. right here, and I will see you next week as we continue our pattern and our topper. We'll get that top finished next week. So until next time, guys, may you continue to be inspired, productive, ever so joyful, never stop believing, and never stop making your dreams in quilting come true. I love y'all. Happy quilting. Whoop whoop. Happy Wednesday. Happy hump day. And I'll see you all soon.